Now, if we look at the way we have priced electricity for the last 100 years, it would be rather like going into a supermarket that priced every item the same, whether you were buying chewing gum or caviar, that took you through a checkout counter where there was no display telling you how many items you bought, and you got a bill several weeks after you went to the market telling you what you owed. Consumers would not, on their own, choose that kind of supermarket, but it's the world that we have been stuck in because of the metering technology and the billing systems that we have had for the last many decades. We have an opportunity to change that, and why should you care? Well, if you're a utility, you should care because what we're doing today is we're building utility systems to meet virtually any demand and any contingency. What that means is that the average utilization of our generation assets is around 50% capacity factors. For transmission and distribution assets, the average utilization is even less than that. If, as is projected by some folks, we need to make $1.5 trillion to $2 trillion worth of investment in the power system over the next 20 years, I doubt that Wall Street is going to be willing to finance that at 50% and less capacity factors. We need to figure out how to improve capacity utilization over the next several years, and prices to devices is an important key in doing that. If you're a consumer, you should care because what we're doing is we're having a system with significant cross subsidies, not unlike what we used to do in the airline industry in the 1960s, where people who were flying to New York or Los Angeles paid extra in order to maintain adequate service to serve the small town that wouldn't necessarily have justified that kind of service on Thanksgiving weekend so that everybody could fly wherever they wanted. Well, what it meant was that not everybody could fly. Only people who were wealthy could afford to fly. And we're doing the same kind of thing in electricity, where consumers that, if they really knew the cost of using power on peak, wouldn't necessarily be using that power, but we are subsidizing that usage from everyone else. And we can make the system much less costly, have much lower requirements for capacity at all levels, and we can operate the system more efficiently if we can simply get prices to devices. You should care if you're a grid operator, because what we really have increasingly today, and will be even more so, is in fact billions of intelligent devices out there. Devices that will either operate for their own metrics, or they will operate in part in consideration of what's going on in the power grid. So if I'm an electric vehicle, for example, it might make the most sense to me, if I'm oblivious to what's going on to the grid, to charge my vehicle during the couple of hours prior to when that vehicle is likely to be driven in the morning. Well, if you already have a steep morning ramp in your power system and suddenly you're adding tens of thousands of electric vehicles, this is not going to be a system that is going to be very easy to operate. So, so it is part of, I think, what we need to do to not just focus on acceptance by consumers, because that's not really so much the issue. We could fashion rates that give consumers a hedge, a price protection against that single month where they might have a very high bill and still have a dynamic signal going out to consumers and their devices. But it's really, how can we take advantage of all of these intelligent devices, many of which already have chips, more of which will in the near future. Many of those chips already have communication capabilities, and we probably could build into the devices at less than $1 a device in mass deployment the ability to communicate and receive price signals. And if we do that, we can begin to use devices that are already out in the grid to make the grid operate more efficiently. So as a regulator, part of what I see as my responsibility is making sure that we begin to undertake the steps necessary for that transition, to make choices transparent to consumers, and to have the architecture of those choices such that prices which will ensure system efficiency are among the prices that consumers see and that potentially even consumers default to as a way of creating an efficient choice architecture from the different range of services that consumers can choose.